Thank you for joining us. This is our first Kansas History Snapshot presentation for this year. And I would like to introduce Eric Colburn. Did I say it?
Yeah.
He comes from us, comes on campus here from Fairbairn Public Library, and he's going to do a presentation about Wild West shows. He has a great background in theater. So, but before he starts, don't forget to pick up this brochure. It's something Deidre Gibbons made to go along with this presentation in case you want to learn more about Wild West shows. And keep in mind, our next presentation is the second Thursday of each month, and we'll have one again in October. In November, we'll take a break, and we'll come back in February. So I'll let Eric begin. Thank you.
All right. As Regina said, I'm the children's librarian at the Great Bend Public Library, but I got my bachelor's degree in theater from Kent State University, and I'm originally from Ohio, so when Regina asked me to come and present on Kansas theater, I was like, I didn't have a class on Kansas theater, but through a little research, I found Wild West shows to be a very interesting topic and something I personally did not know a ton about before. I knew they existed and were an important part of American theater history. So what is the West? What do you think of when you think about the West?
Cowboys and Indians.
Cowboys and Indians, instantly, of course. You think of cowboy hats and the...
Rick Abel.
Boots
and hats.
And your chaps and your cowboy hats and teepees and all of that. Now, do you think that's somewhat of a dramatized view of the West, or do you think it's a genuine artifact of the West?
It's genuine.
You think so? So, and you know, these were questions I was asking myself as I was putting this together, and what exactly has shaped your view of the West? You all, I assume most of you are from Kansas. You're not? Okay, so.
Near mine.
I knew you were. But, you know, people who are from the area may have a better idea of what the West is too than someone from the East or something like that. And who are some of the prominent figures to you from the West?
Laura Ingalls.
Laura Ingalls Wilder.
I second that.
It was right on the tip of my tongue.
So, and we get these great characters from the West. And then we get into what are Wild West shows. And what I found is they are really an exhibition of what we dramatize as the West here in America. And they were created because there was a lot of interest at the turn of the century in the Wild West as discovering the frontier was becoming, when there was no more frontier to discover, when everything had been conquered, so to speak, in the West. And they did appeal very much to Easterners and Europeans as well. It was a big crowd. And they were somewhat of a true representation of the West, but they were a little dramatized too, because you got to get some people in the seats, as we know, as part of that. So some of the characters we see develop from the Wild West, and they were real people, were Buffalo Bill Cody was one of the most famous. And that's who we're going to concentrate on today, because it seems he made the biggest and best Wild West show there ever was, from the information I have found. Will Rogers was another big one. Johnny Baker, Chief Sitting Bull, Calamity Jane, Annie Oakley, Geronimo, Chief Rains in Face, and Lillian Smith. Buffalo Bill Cody was known for being a skilled marksman, and he was a very experienced frontierman and performer, actually, when he started his Wild West shows. Will Rogers was very famous for his rope tricks and pony tricks. Probably most of you know and have heard of Will Rogers, I assume. Johnny Baker was a skilled sharpshooter. And actually, at the age of 7, he was adopted by Buffalo Bill Cody and was trained under him to take over the Wild West show, was the thought at that time. Chief Sitting Bull, and it seems like most of the Indians who were involved in the Wild West show were just kind of walk-on celebrities who would come on and wave. The information I found on Chief Sitting Bull said he was paid $50 to come in, make a ring around the show arena, and leave. And that's all he did in the show.
He
was
walked.
make an entrance, basically. And it seems most of the famous Indian chiefs were paid to do just that. Calamity Jane was an experienced horsewoman and marksman, and there were a lot of stories going around about Calamity Jane, but my research tells me that she made up most of them about herself, and they weren't actually true. So, Annie Oakley, of course, was a famed markswoman. She got very famous. She performed a gun trick where she shot a cigarette out of the Crown Prince of Germany's mouth. And that was like her famed trick. She was also from Ohio. I just have to
Little
throw
plug
that
for
out
Ohio.
there. So, Geronimo, again, a celebrity and, war hero. Reins in Face, he was a famed Indian chief, and he was credited with killing General Custer, so he got a lot of fame for that, and that was his. One of the things they liked to do during the show was reenact Custer's last stand. Was a big deal at this time, so he would, of course, play his part. Lillian Smith was also a markswoman and sharpshooter, but it seems she was nowhere near as skilled as Annie Oakley, and she had a reputation for being quite the loose woman, apparently. So,
She had her own show in town.
yeah. Annie Oakley was considered very feminine and very ladylike, and kept all of her feminine charm, shall we say, while doing her gun shooting, which was uncharacteristic at the time. And Lillian Smith was quite the opposite, and they were actually in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show at the same time, and they had a reputation for not liking one another. So there was some tension there. Now, Buffalo Bill was born February 26, 1846, and he died on January 10th of 1917. He lived most of his life in the American West. He did spend some time in Kansas, but Kansas wasn't a state at the time, so, getting an exact location for him is difficult during this time period. And the Wild West show did start in Omaha, Nebraska, but it toured all over the United States, too. He got his nickname from being a master buffalo hunter. He was credited with shooting 11 out of 12 buffalo, which I guess is an accomplishment. I don't know how difficult it is to shoot a buffalo personally, so I'll just have to take their word for it. And he's, during the Civil War, you can make a lot of money killing buffalo for the Army. And he is claimed to have made the most money off of the Army. He killed 4,280 buffalo in an 18-month period. So I guess that's a lot. Again, I don't really know what the average buffalo hunter would kill at the time. But he had a wide variety of jobs, and he started work from the age of 11. He was an Army scout, a guide, a showman, a Pony Express rider, an Indian fighter and author, and he's a true legend of the West. And he was really the first person to cash in on stardom and being well known, is what we see during this period. This was one of the first dime novels written about Buffalo Bill. Ed Buntline is credited with creating the first dime novel of Buffalo Bill, and his book was actually turned into a stage play, and it was called Sons of the Prairie, and it toured all over, and Buffalo Bill actually got in the show and played himself. So he was touring with this show, and then he got the great idea to create a Wild West show. So he created the Wild West show in 1883. It was first launched in Omaha, Nebraska, like I said, and he's the first character to really emerge and cash in on the success of being a character and a celebrity in America. And he created the show because he was really concerned about the Western way of life dying out. He wanted to show people how fun and exciting life in the West could be, and settling, and the animals that were different than from what people saw in the West. Because they actually traveled with bison, which, I mean, that seems really dangerous to me, but, you know. Touring bison all over the country. So on this page, this is a, I'm sorry, it was Scouts of the Prairie, not Sons of the Prairie, my mistake. Ned Buntline's play, Scouts of the Prairie. Here is a billboard clip of that, and this is a newspaper clipping on the other side. It gives the synopsis of, it has On the Plains, the Renegades Camp. And it seems like it was more of a variety type show rather than like going to see a play, actually. And actually, that's kind of what the Wild West show developed into. It was more of a circus act. And people would come from miles around to see these shows. And every show would start off with a huge parade. They would come down the street. Now, to give you some idea, these shows would include up to 1,200 performers. 1,200 people coming down the street. So this is a little clip of a parade, and you can just see the different people coming down the street, and an endless parade of horses, and the quality's not that great because film is just starting at this period, of course. But you can see the Indians here in the background. The show also included the Rough Riders. Teddy Roosevelt was part of the Wild West show and toured with them as well. But you can see kids come and all kinds of wagons and stagecoaches and things like that. Just a massive parade of people and animals and just all kinds of stuff.
They've all got their dress clothes on. They all have their dress clothes on. They've got their jackets and top hats.
Yeah, and this one
It's not casual, you know.
It would have been considered, you know, equivalent to going to the theater. Because it was not a horribly cheap show to go to either. I found. We'll talk about the admission cost a little later. But, so what did the show consist of? Each show lasted 3 to 4 hours, which I found a little surprising too. So, but again, it seems like each show had little vignettes. It was kind of like equivalent to going to the rodeo, where you would see one thing, there'd be another act, you know, and things like that. So we have the parade to start the show. That's going to draw everybody in to get them in the tent to see what's going on. And then they would usually reenact some historical event. One of their favorites was Custer's Last Stand, as I said. So they would do that one. Another favorite one was settlers defending the homestead. So they would hire Indians to come in and kind of attack a little homestead, and the settlers, of course, would fight them off and win, and it, you know, was great. And they would have little Indian wars and reenact that as well. And then you would start to see some displays of showmanship. You would see sharpshooting, hunts. They really like to display hunting buffalo and other animals. They would have racing. even foot races, which I found, I didn't know how many people would line up to see a foot race. But at this period, I guess it was typical for them to put different races of people against one another and see which ones would win. So you'd have a Native American, a cowboy, there might be a Mexican, and there might be an African American man, and everyone would root for someone different. So you would have that. And events they would have were like a bison hunt or train robberies or Indian attacks was the usual events. And then I thought this was a horrible grand finale, but the grand finale of the show was called Attack on a Burning Cabin. And it would actually be Indians attacking a cabin and setting it on fire, and people would come in or the cowboys would come in and rescue them. And it just seemed like a horrible display to me, but I don't know, maybe that's just mine. Sharpshooting was a favorite display of the time. Annie Oakley could shoot a dime out of a man's hand, and that was something very amazing to see. Buffalo Bill was said to be unrivaled in shooting as he was riding a horse. And Lillian Smith, as I said, was a shameless flirt and did not get along well with Annie Oakley. And then I have a little clip you can see of Annie Oakley shooting her target. Now first she's going to shoot the targets on the wall, which, again, I don't know much about guns and shooting. And then at this point, what he's doing is throwing up these glass balls, and they're filled with like colored powder and feathers, and they would explode. This is the Sioux Ghost dance. They would hire Native Americans to do dances from their culture. So you have a whole group of Native American performers there. And it said that this dance was like, it was a sign of impending trouble for the Indian tribe, but it was considered very beautiful, and so they would do it for display. And the buffalo dance here, done with a few less Indians. And bucking broncos and very rodeo displays, very rodeo-esque displays, I guess, were very popular during the show. What I found humorous was this man shooting off the gun at the top while the guy, I didn't know if he was doing that to get the bronco to buck the guy more, or, you know. But just some interesting original footage of the Wild West show. Now the performers. The show contains as many as 1,200 performers, which I'm sure Aaron can attest to. 1,200 performers in one show is a little ridiculous. And then you're going to travel with them across the country because that's going to be easy. And performers would include Native Americans, Mexicans, men from other heritages, cowboys, numerous animals. They had broncos, mules, Texas steer, elk, deer, bears, and moose, all in their show. And big names of the time, of course, came from Will Rogers, Annie Oakley, Geronimo, and Sitting Bull were all big attractions. This was one of the largest shows of the time to travel, and all performers were fed 3 hot meals every day. So not only do you have this huge troupe of people, but you're going to feed them 3 hot meals every day in a time where there's no, running water, electricity, and things like that. So you better get up awful early, I think. And they said the ranges were actually 20-foot long ranges they would use to cook show actually generated its own electricity that it used. And performers lived on train cars and in tents. And it also staffed its own fire department. Fire was a big concern at the time because a lot of people still using candles and gas for lighting. So having your own fire department was probably made it a lot easier, I'm sure, to get into different towns rather than taking their fire protection away. And in 1899, they covered 11,000 miles in 200 days, giving 341 performances in 132 cities. So, I mean, just the logistics of getting all these people and animals together must have been a nightmare. I would not want to be the manager for that show. So, on the next page I have a picture of the cast from one of their shows. The show didn't always employ 1,200 people. It could range less or more depending on who could be there. Like Chief Sitting Bull was only with the show for like 4 years, I think. And the show ran for a period of 30 years, which is pretty amazing. So in the first 2 years, the show saw 10 million spectators, which was just amazing. And it made a profit of over $100,000. In today's money, that would be about $2,516 and some change. People were drawn to the adventure and the excitement, and then we start to see dozens of other similar shows pop up. Again, people trying to cash in on the same success, but no one would ever do it to the scale that Buffalo Bill has done with his show. And this is a clip, and it didn't load properly into my PowerPoint, so I have it here. But this is a clip about Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And it talks specifically a little bit more about Annie Oakley and some of the tricks she did in her show.
The whole world was fascinated with the West. And as it was becoming settled, those elements that were seen as the foundation of America's uniqueness, the rugged individualism and the adventure and the conflict with Indians and with Buffalo and all of those reckless parts of America's past seemed to be coming to an end. Buffalo Bill was a representative, a living representative of that story, of that adventure. And it's that adventure that he put into his Wild West show. Audiences saw the real stagecoach, they saw real soldiers, they saw real Indians and cowboys.
There were horses, there were steer, there were live buffalo.
It was into this roiling microcosm of the Wild West that Annie Oakley, the little girl from Ohio, first stepped in April 1885. Cody placed her low on the bill, but she soon became an audience favorite.
She tripped into the arena. She didn't walk in. She blew kisses. She waved. She was like animated, alive, like this sweet person, but with this big bang gun. She starts off slow, 1 ball, 2 balls.
Glass balls, which when they're hit, they explode and feathers fly out.
Frank would toss out 1, and then 2 at a time, and then 3 at a time. Then Annie Oakley would toss them up herself. She'd toss 2 or 3 or 4 target balls in the air, grab a shotgun, shoot 2, grab another, shoot 2 more.
She could hit all 3 before any one of them would reach the ground. Then she'd go to 6.
Her act gets faster and faster and faster and faster until, you know, it's just like boom, boom, things are just being broken all around.
She could shoot with her left hand, with her right hand.
She, like, turns her gun upside down or sideways or side in the mirror.
One of her favorite tricks was to have Frank hold a playing card up, and she could either shoot through the heart when it was flat against her, or if it was held sideways, she could split the card in two, which is a pretty amazing shot. Occasionally she'd miss a shot on purpose, and then she'd kind of pout. This was part of the act, because she could always hit the target. She was somebody who never missed.
I think it's an innate skill. She said, you know, nobody ever taught me to shoot. I think it was just, a love of a gun was just born in me.
It was an instinct and a skill and an ability that only persons who have phenomenal vision, have a wonderful sense of timing, who have hand-to-eye coordination, who have good balance, and who are really very athletic. Because a really good shot has to be a really good athlete.
Once Annie's act started getting rave reviews, Cody moved her up the bill right after the opening procession. That season, 150,000 people in 40 cities across America saw something entirely new. A woman who could shoot as well as any man while conveying a youthful innocence that, whether Annie realized it or not, was sexy. It was the stuff of stardom.
And so it really sounds like even from that clip that the group of performers in the show really knew how to work an audience. You know, her little trick of, you know, missing a shot and, you know, pretending to be disappointed and then outdoing herself and stuff like that was just really characteristic of good showmanship at the time. So this is a picture of the Wild West show in Brooklyn, New York, and you can just see how huge these tents are to contain the show. They go all the way back to the buildings that look to be pretty far away. I just thought it was a pretty amazing photograph to have a show like this that travels around. We wouldn't think of doing something like this today. It's just too big, you know. They tell you were crazy. And Annie Oakley, interestingly enough, was a very small woman even for this time period. She only stood about 5 foot tall and was very thin and slender. So when she came out, people never really expected the great showmanship and marksmanship she could display. So admission for the show, the cost was about 50 cents, and children under 9 years were admitted at half price. You could get a reserved seat for $1, which sounds cheap to us now, but if you equal it out, 50 cents equals about $13.48 in today's money. So this wasn't a cheap show to go to. It was pretty, I mean, I guess if you're comparing it to Broadway, yes. Okay, we would gladly pay $13.48 to go to a Broadway show, but this was a touring show that came through, and that isn't an incredibly cheap price, I wouldn't say. Is $13 cheap to you all? I don't know. So, but costs to run the show were as high as $4,000 a day. In today's money, that's about $108,000 a day to run a show. Again, I think that's pretty high cost to be running a show.
A lot of it in transportation and food.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money spent in a lot of different places. And I found that surviving records indicate that women were paid equally as men in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, which for the time, almost unheard of. So I found that pretty fascinating. On the next page, I found some pictures of tickets from the Wild West show. This one's a little bit hard to see. It's from 1886, and it's just the admission ticket. It has a little scene of Buffalo Bill Cody on the other side. 1896 is the upper right-hand corner, and 1899 down here in the lower right-hand corner. So, just some interesting things there. So then the Wild West show goes to Europe. Europeans are fascinated with the Wild West because it's something that's singularly American. No one else has created it except us here. So the first time they go to Europe is for Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in 1887 at Windsor Castle. Now remember the cast size I told you, so they all have to get on a boat and float on over to England. So the cast that went to Europe included 200 passengers, 97 Native Americans, 18 buffalo, 181 horses, 10 elk, 4 donkeys, 5 longhorns, 2 deer, 10 mules, and a stagecoach. All were shipped to England to do the Wild West show there. And they actually toured Europe after the Golden Jubilee until 1892. It's during this period Buffalo Bill Cody meets up with Barnum from Barnum and Bailey Brothers Circus, and they start to revolutionize the way the show is traveling around, because again, the logistics of accomplishing this are just horrendous. But people in Europe were quite impressed that the show could go from one town to the next and be set up overnight. They had never seen anything like that before. And the show really defined to many Europeans what America is and was today.
At the time.
I reversed that, didn't I? Was and is today. So the popularity of the show, it really what appealed to a great number of people. Easterners liked the show because they could enjoy the thrill and adventure and excitement, but they didn't really have to experience any danger. So they could sit and spectate and, oh, that's great, but, you know, I'm not really in danger at all. Europeans liked the show again because it was uniquely American, and they haven't seen anything like this before. You know, they haven't seen any sparks of the Wild West in Europe before the show comes. And the show toured for a period of 30 years, which is amazing, from 1883 to 1913. The largest performance was given at the Chicago's World's Fair to an audience of 18,000 people in 1893.
When they did that trip to Europe, did they do you know if they traveled around and did other sites other than the Windsor?
Yeah, it was more than just England. They traveled all over the country. But what sparked the initial going to Europe was Queen Victoria wanted to see them.
I was going to say that'd be pretty expensive just for that one event.
Yeah. and it did say they had sent over several shipments of their, you know, animals and supplies and things like that. I just thought it was amazing you would even attempt to ship all that stuff. I mean, I couldn't imagine how much that cost, you know, but yeah. And so here are some of the posters from Buffalo Bill's show. This was one of his posters. As I said, the Rough Riders joined and toured with the show for periods. A lot of the acts come and go. You know, Chief Sitting Bull was only there for a short period of time, and they changed it up. I think part of it was so the show didn't get old. It was always new. You know, you're adding new performers. You have some of the old ones, but you have new acts, new people joining. As the popularity of the show was waning, they started adding like Asian performers and acrobats and things like that. This is another famous Wild West show, Pawnee Bill's. He pretty much worked with Buffalo Bill Cody a lot, and sometimes they did shows in combination where they had both shows performing together. Another famous one was the 101 Ranch by the Miller Brothers. This is a poster for their show, and they always credited having the real Wild West. You know, what the definition of that is, who knows, you know. And this picture, unfortunately, was pretty small. This was W.I. Swain's Western Spectacular production, which included Jesse James in it. So the decline of the show came around the turn of the century. In 1894, the economy is really harsh. From what I found, the economy is harsh because the cotton and textile market is saturated right now. So the South, who produces cotton and things like this, they cannot afford to come to the shows because cotton's not selling. So there's no money for things like that. And Buffalo Bill started to lose a lot of money in the production, trying to keep it alive. And the era of the Wild West show is said to have ended in 1917, around that time period. There were some that came after, and there were little resurgences. But as the show is declining, Buffalo Bill signed a contract in which he was tricked by these two men, Bonfil and Temen, where he sold them the show, demoting himself to just a performer in the show, and they were merely an attraction of a circus then touring around. And from that point on, the show kind of destroyed itself. People lost interest in it, and in 1913 the show declared bankruptcy. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons for the decline of the Wild West show. We're seeing new inventions. Radio is introduced. Motion pictures are introduced. And as soon as the Wild West show declines, Buffalo Bill actually finances his own movie called The Indian Wars. It's a silent film. I wasn't able to find a clip of that movie because I wanted to show that. And the first Western movie that's ever made is called The Great Train Robbery. So it's about 10 minutes and 30 seconds, I think, of film. And I have a little clip to show you. And it was considered, of course, far more cheaper to make a movie than to have the show of thousands of performers and animals and things like that. They also, you saw a lot more rodeos popping up. A rodeo was a lot easier to put on and cheaper than a Wild West show. You could see all of the tricks you saw in the Wild West show, plus the proprietor of a rodeo doesn't have to provide all the animals. Some of the people participating are going to bring the animals and things like that. So here is a clip. This is a clip from The Great Train Robbery. It's a silent film. It's quite, it's kind of funny to watch. Here in the beginning, the train robber attacks one of these men, and you can tell at one point they traded out for like a stuffed man that he throws.
Special effects were
yeah, so like right there,
there
is where you can see, you know, and as he's throwing it off, you can totally tell that's not a real person, you know, which was great. And it seems they didn't quite have transitions down with the first motion pictures, which I'm sure will come in time, you know. But the transition to the next part of the film, they're always kind of slow and clunky and things like that. It was fascinating to watch. And in the next part, they're going to bring everybody off the train and hold them up. So here they come doing that. But I just kept thinking about watching a movie today and how quickly we're used to things happening, and like, it seems like he's taking time to rob each person in a line, and if we would just today
That would be edited and on the floor.
everybody, and that would be the end of it, you know. Next scene, but here, I mean, they're slowly going down the line of people, you know, and this guy, he has this dramatic.
I could have been an actor during that time. I could have rivaled that death right there. I know I could have.
But they're still going down the line. I think it's fascinating because we can't even really see what they're doing, you know, like, but they're worried about getting each element on it, which is totally fascinating. So that was just a little clip I picked out of that. You can actually watch the whole movie on YouTube if you want, but I wasn't going to take 10 minutes to show you the whole film. And so remnants of the Wild West show today, we of course see the rodeo very affected by the Wild West show because I remember going to the rodeo as a kid and seeing like the woman in the exploding box and you know, the little sideshow bits we see in rodeos today are very reminiscent of Wild West shows of the past. Western movies was a complete genre that developed from Wild West shows. And of course, Western television shows, who doesn't love those? They wouldn't become popular really until the 1940s and 50s. We have a strong Western culture that's developed from the ideas put forth in these Wild West shows. And there are still some Wild West shows today, I found. I remember going to Arizona not too long ago, and they have like old Tucson studios there, and you can see a Wild West fight there. Or Tombstone, Arizona, I've been there too, and they, you know, reenact gunfights there. And we have Dodge City here in Kansas, where you can see the reenactments of the gunfights, and we still have a strong European following. And I found they actually do Buffalo Bill's Wild West show at Disneyland Paris. So this show is actually being recreated now for Europeans. And they actually have their own theater. This is a picture of Disneyland Paris, and it's a whole theater dedicated to Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. So it's something still alive and going on today. You can see a lot of YouTube videos of it online, but they're all in French, so. And which is a little funny to watch a Western, you know, being in French, you know, but very interesting, I think. So does anyone have any questions? I know it's a lot of information, but terribly fascinating. Fascinating performers and fascinating lives they've led. And the Cohen Center has actually a collection of dime novels, that's where the Wild West shows came from, where these dime novels being written and things like that. We tried to find the actual dime novel that spurred Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, but it is not in the collection.
Not the specific collection.
But I'm sure there are other fascinating Wild West stories in there. I have not perused it, but
There's a beautiful Buffalo Bill Museum just outside of Yellowstone, the east entrance of Yellowstone in Cody, Wyoming. If anybody's traveling to Yellowstone, I encourage you to stop by. It's very nice.
They actually have a really nice section about the Wild West show on their website. It was one of the places I consulted in making this presentation. And they have a lot of information and tidbits.
And he has beautiful Remingtons, a whole wing of Remingtons, and it's a really nice museum, especially for a small town.
He raised the funds to back him on all of this. Did he have a group of investors, or $108,000 a day is a kind of big bucks?
Well, they were making a lot of money. I mean, in the first 2 years, they saw 10 million spectators. That's a lot for 1 year, for any show to see. So just charging the admission, and he had also made money from doing his performance of the Scouts on the Prairie as well.
So you think he was funding this whole show with his own money and taking it back from ticket sales back into it, or what have you?
Yeah, because when the show started to decline, he was investing his money to try to keep it alive still at that point, and he was losing all of his money that he had invested in the show.
Did you run across any statistics? I was curious about how many people were killed or injured.
I didn't
It
see
seems like a very
anything
dangerous
about that.
environment with live ammo, people watching, and I'm thinking, people shooting up in the air. I'm thinking, well, surely things had happened.
I'm sure they did, because I was even watching the scene with the bison running in the ring, and I mean, I don't know a lot about bison, but I've heard they're pretty wild, and I could just imagine one charging into the crowd, and, I didn't really come across anything that said numerous people were injured or whatever, but I'm sure there had to be incidences where, audience members were even, injured and things like that.
Eric, you may know this, but here's a little theater trivia piece of information. In the olden days, I don't think we do it so much now, but in the olden days, when you went to the theater and you got a ticket, if you got a ticket that was given to you free, complimentary, they would click a hole in the ticket so that you knew it was, so when you went to count the stub, that was a free one. Right? And they generally referred to that ticket with a hole in it as an Annie Oakley.
Oh.
Because of a shooting.
I didn't know that. You learn something new.
You never know.
And I really found that fascinating. She could turn the card sideways and split it from a distance. That's amazing.
And that kind of came out of a need, right? I mean, I think I remember seeing that documentary that showed a piece of, I'm trying to remember, she had to fend for, she was put in a position where she had to provide for her family.
Yeah.
And so she had to get a gun and go out in the woods and try to feed the other siblings.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that started. I think I remember that.
It seems like almost everyone involved in the show was put in that position. Buffalo Bill Cody, at the age of 11, his father was dead, and he had to go raise money and give jobs to support the rest of the family. These were people who were just used to doing hard work, and they enjoyed doing the Wild West show for people.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Everything